Tonight you can put it down, whatever you have been carrying. The worry that sits behind your eyes. The conversation you have replayed 400 times. The quiet guilt that follows you into the evening. Like a shadow you cannot quite shake. Tonight you do not have to hold any of it. You have been carrying so much, not because you are weak, but because you care deeply, because you feel things fully, because somewhere along the way, you decided that holding on was the same as being strong. But it is not, and tonight, in the quietness of this hour, you are allowed to discover that you do not need to fix anything right now. You do not need to solve anything. You do not even need to understand anything. These are not lessons to memorize or rules to follow. There are no tests at the end. They are simply stories, gentle, unhurried stories, told in the way they have been told for thousands of years, passed from voice to voice, from one quiet night to another. All you need to do is lie here and listen, and if you fall asleep before the end, that is not failure. That is the whole point. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. It is a beautiful thing to know that right now, in this very moment, someone in London is closing their eyes, while someone in Tokyo is pulling up the covers, while someone in Sao Paulo is turning off the last light. We are all here together, sharing this quiet. And that is enough. Tonight we will explore some of the oldest and most tender wisdom the Buddha ever offered. Teachings about what we carry, why we carry it, and what happens when we finally, gently set it down. These are teachings that have helped people rest a little easier for over 2,000 years. You do not need to know anything about Buddhism to receive what is here. These are human stories. They belong to anyone who has ever felt the weight of holding on too long. If this path of quiet stories calls to something in you, you are welcome to subscribe and return to this space whenever you need a slower night. So settle in now. Let your body grow heavy against whatever is holding you. Take one slow breath, not a perfect breath, just a real one. Let the shoulders drop. Let the jaw soften. And let us begin our journey together. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. There is a story that has been told in monasteries and tea houses for centuries. It begins as many good stories do, on a road that led nowhere in particular. Two monks were walking through the countryside. After a week of heavy rain, the world had that washed clean feeling, as though someone had taken a cloth to everything and wiped it down, leaving the colors brighter and the edges sharper than they had been before. The path wound between rice paddies, flooded with brown water that reflected the grey sky like polished metal. Dragonflies hovered just above the surface, touching down and lifting off in patterns that seemed random, but were not. The air had that particular sweetness that only comes after a long rain. The smell of wet earth and green things growing, of soil that has finally drunk its fill and is breathing out. The younger monk had been ordained only 3 seasons. His robes were still new enough that he folded them carefully each night, pressing the creases flat with his palms, the way his mother used to press his school clothes. He walked with the careful posture of someone still learning how to inhabit his role. Back straight, eyes lowered, hands clasped, just so. The older monk had been walking roads like this for 40 years. His robes had the softness of cloth that has been washed 1,000 times and no longer tries to be anything other than what it is. He walked the way a river walks, without effort, without hurry, simply moving, because that is what rivers do. Their sandals made soft sounds against the mud, a rhythm that neither of them needed to think about. The countryside stretched around them, in every direction, flat and green and patient, and the sky was the color of a dove's wing. They came to a river crossing, where the water had risen, well above the stepping stones. The stones were still there, somewhere beneath the brown current, but they were useless now, swallowed by the rain that had fallen all week. A woman stood at the edge of the water, dressed in white, holding a bundle of cloth against her chest. She looked at the water, and then looked down at her shoes, which were thin and already damp from the muddy road, and then looked at the water again. She did not ask for help. She simply stood there with the particular stillness of someone who has calculated the odds and found them unfavorable. The older monk walked to her without a word. He did not ask if she wanted help. He did not explain what he was about to do. He simply bent slightly, lifted her onto his back, the way you might lift a sleeping child, and stepped into the water. The current pushed against his legs. The cold of it climbed up past his ankles, past his shins up to his knees. It did not seem to bother him. He placed each foot with the sureness of a man who has crossed many rivers and knows that the trick is not to fight the water, but to let it push and find your balance within the pushing. He set her down on the other side. She thanked him once, quietly, the way you thank someone who has done something kind but unremarkable. The way you thank someone for holding a door. And then she walked away, down a different path, her white clothes growing smaller until the road bent, and she was gone. That was all a small kindness on a muddy road. The kind of thing that happens and then is over, but the younger monk could not let it go. They walked for an hour in silence. The mud dried on their sandals and turned to dust. They walked for 2 hours. The sun broke through the clouds and warmed the backs of their necks. Birds came and went. The landscape changed from paddies to forest, from forest to hillside, from hillside to a long straight road lined with trees, whose leaves were just beginning to turn, and still the younger monk carried it. This thing that had happened, this rule that had been broken, this weight he had picked up at the riverbank and refused to set down. Finally, when the silence between them had grown so heavy that it had its own shape, the younger monk spoke. "Brother, I must ask you something. It has been troubling me." The older monk did not slow his pace. "Then ask." "At the river. The woman, you carried her." "I did. But we are not permitted to touch women. You know this, the precepts are clear. We took vows, we did." "Then how could you carry her? How could you lift her onto your back, as though the precepts meant nothing?" The older monk walked a few more steps. Then he stopped. He turned and looked at the younger one, not with anger, not with impatience, not with the superiority of a teacher correcting a student, but with the kind of gentleness that comes from having watched many young monks struggle with the same knots he once struggled with himself. "I set her down at the riverbank," he said softly. "That was 3 hours ago. Why are you still carrying her?" The younger monk stood very still. A breeze moved through the trees and scattered a few dry leaves across the path between them. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. No words came, because the answer was not complicated. It was not hidden. It was so obvious that saying it aloud would have been like explaining that water is wet or that the sky is above. He was still carrying her, because that is what minds do. They pick things up, a moment, a worry, a rule, a judgment, and then they forget to put them down. Or perhaps they do not forget. Perhaps they simply do not know that putting things down is something they are allowed to do. They walked on together after that. The younger monk did not speak again for a long time, but something had shifted in the way he walked, a looseness in his shoulders that had not been there before, as though a rope that had been pulled taut for hours had finally been given slack. The road stretched ahead of them, quiet and long, and the evening light was beginning to turn the sky the color of old bronze. The Buddha had a word for this tendency, upadana. It is sometimes translated as clinging or grasping, but those words make it sound dramatic, like someone white-knuckled on a rope over a cliff. The truth is much quieter than that. Upadana is the way you hold on to a comment someone made 3 weeks ago at dinner. It is the way you replay an argument while brushing your teeth. It is the way you carry a version of yourself that no longer exists. A younger self, a thinner self, a more successful self, and refuse to let that version rest. Not because you are dramatic, not because something is wrong with you, simply because no one ever showed you that you could put it down. You know this feeling tonight, lying here. You know what it is to carry something long after the moment has passed, long after the river has been crossed, long after the woman has walked away, long after the conversation has ended and everyone else has moved on. You carry it because putting it down feels like giving up, because holding on feels like caring, because somewhere, very deep down, you believe that if you stop carrying it, it means it never mattered. But what if putting something down is not the same as saying it did not matter? What if it simply means you have carried it far enough? There was a woman who made rope. She lived alone in a cottage at the edge of a village where the river turned south toward the sea, in a place where the mornings were cold enough to see your breath and the evenings smelled of wood smoke, and the sharp green scent of drying herbs hung from the ceiling beams. Her cottage had a single room with a stone floor worn smooth by decades of footsteps, her own and her mother's before her, and her grandmother's before that. The walls were thick and kept the cold out, and in the corner stood a spinning wheel that was older than anyone in the village could remember. Rope making was the family trade, passed down the way. Some families passed down a name or a set of silver spoons. She had learned it from her mother, who had learned it from hers, sitting on the same stone floor, breathing the same dust of dried hemp fibers, learning the same twist of the wrist that turned loose strands into something that could hold. She was good at it. Her hands knew the work, the way a musician's hands know an instrument, without thinking, without effort, with the kind of ease that only comes from doing something 10,000 times, until the doing disappears, and only the thing being done remains. She could twist hemp fibers into cord while carrying on a conversation, while watching the rain streak down the window glass, while thinking about nothing at all. The rope she made was strong, and even fishermen trusted it with their nets. Builders trusted it with their scaffolding. Farmers trusted it to hold their gates shut against the wind. It was by any measure good rope, but she could not stop making it. Her cottage had rope everywhere. Coils of it hung from the rafters like sleeping snakes. Bundles of it leaned against the walls in every corner. Baskets of it sat beneath the windows, on the table beside the bed, under the bed, stacked in the doorway, so that she had to step over them to get outside. She made rope in the morning before the sun came up, when the birds were still quiet, and the only sound was the creak of the wheel. She made rope in the evening, after the light had gone, working by candlelight, squinting at fibers she could barely see. She made rope on days when no one needed rope, on days when the fishermen had enough, on days when her hands ached so badly that she had to soak them in warm water before she could close them around the fibers. She often wondered if her mother had felt this way too, this pull, this inability to let the wheel stand still. But her mother was not here to ask. Her mother had died on a Tuesday morning in late spring, quietly, the way a candle goes out when there is no draft, not blown, just finished. And after the burial, the daughter had walked home and sat down at the wheel and begun to spin. She had not stopped since. A traveling monk passed through the village one autumn, when the leaves were turning copper and the air had that first bite of coming winter. He was the kind of monk who walked slowly and noticed things. The way a spider had built its web between two fence posts. The way a cat slept in a rectangle of sunlight as though it had measured the light and positioned itself exactly. He stopped at her cottage to ask for water and saw the rope. "You must sell a great deal of rope," he said, accepting the cup she offered him. "I sell some," she replied, "but I make far more than I can ever sell." Why? She was quiet for a long moment. The spinning wheel stood still behind her. The question was so simple that it embarrassed her, the way simple questions often do when they land on a truth we have been walking around. "Because I do not know what else to do with my hands," she said finally. "If I stop, they feel empty. And the emptiness frightens me." The monk drank his water slowly. He looked at the coils and bundles and baskets. He looked at her hands, which were rough and deeply lined, the knuckles swollen, the fingertips calloused so thick that she could press them against a candle flame and feel nothing. Hands that had worked so hard for so long that they had forgotten what it felt like to be still. "What are you afraid would happen?" he asked gently. "If you sat with empty hands for just one evening?" "I do not know. I think I am afraid I would have to feel something." "And what might that be?" She looked at the stone floor, at the grooves worn into it by her mother's feet. "That she is gone," she said, "that I am alone in this house. That the rope was never about the rope. It was about keeping my hands too full to feel how empty the rest of me has become." The monk nodded. He did not tell her she was wrong. He did not tell her she was right. He did not offer advice or a teaching or a technique. He simply sat with her in the quiet of her cottage while the evening came on and the shadows grew long and the fire in the small hearth burned down to orange coals. "The rope is not the problem," he said after a long while, "but it is also not the answer. It is what you reach for when the weight becomes too much, and every time you reach for it, the weight stays exactly where it has always been." Waiting, she did not answer. But she also did not reach for the hemp that night. She sat with her hands in her lap, palms open, fingers uncurled, and let the grief she had been weaving around for 7 years finally sit beside her like a guest she had been too busy to welcome. The rope maker did not become a different person that night. She did not experience a great awakening or a sudden freedom. She simply sat still for the first time in 7 years and discovered that the grief did not destroy her. It was heavy. It was real. It ached in places she had forgotten she had. But it did not destroy her. And in the morning, when she picked up the hemp again, she did so with open hands, choosing to make rope rather than needing to. Thich Nhat Hanh once offered a very tender observation. He said that most of us spend our entire lives running, not toward anything in particular, but away from something we cannot name. We run from our loneliness, from our sadness, from the quiet places inside us that we have never learned to sit with. And the running takes so many forms. Sometimes it looks like work. Sometimes it looks like worry. Sometimes it looks like planning or organizing or making lists. Sometimes it looks like scrolling through a phone at midnight, looking for something, anything, to fill the silence. Sometimes it looks like rope. Sometimes it looks like stones in a wooden box. Sometimes it looks like a young monk on a dusty road, carrying a woman he set down hours ago. There is one more small story I would like to share before we rest on this teaching. In a monastery high in the mountains, where the clouds sometimes drifted through the open windows, like visitors who had lost their way, there lived a monk who collected stones. Not precious stones, not beautiful stones, just stones, ordinary grey and brown stones from the paths and riverbeds around the monastery. He kept them in a wooden box beside his sleeping mat, and every evening he would take them out and arrange them in a line, counting them, turning each one over in his fingers. The other monks found this strange, but said nothing. People carry what they carry. It is not always our place to ask why. One evening the abbot sat beside him and watched him arrange his stones. What do they represent? The abbot asked. This one is the day my father told me I would never amount to anything, the monk said, holding up a smooth grey stone. This one is the year I spent angry at my brother. This one is a lie I told when I was 14. This one is a kindness I failed to offer when it was needed. He had 47 stones, 47 regrets, 47 wounds, 47 moments he had decided to carry rather than release. The abbot picked up one of the stones. It was small and cool in his palm. If you set this one down, he said, does the thing it represents disappear? No. Does it become less true? No. Then what changes? The monk thought for a long time. The clouds moved through the window and out again. My hands become lighter, he said. Yes, said the abbot, that is all. That is everything. And this is perhaps the quiet center of everything we have explored so far tonight. We do not carry just one thing. We carry many things: the old grief and the fresh worry, the resentment and the guilt, the hope that hurts and the memory that won't fade, the version of ourselves we wish we were, and the version we are afraid we might be. And we think we must put them down one at a time, carefully in order, making sure each one is properly dealt with before we move to the next. But what if you could simply open your hands? All at once, not forever, just for tonight. The way the rope maker opened hers. Not because the grief disappeared, but because she finally stopped spinning it into something she could hold. Tonight, if your hands feel full, if your mind feels full, if you came to this hour carrying the accumulated weight of a day, a week, a year, a lifetime of things you picked up and never set back down, you have permission to open them. Not because the things you carry do not matter, but because you matter too. And you have been holding on so long that you have forgotten what your hands feel like when they are empty. An old Zen teacher was once asked by a student, "How do I let go?" The teacher said, "How do you hold on?" The student said, "I do not know. I am not trying to hold on." And the teacher smiled and said, "Then you are closer to letting go than you think. The holding is not something you do. It is something you have forgotten to stop doing." Perhaps right now, as you hear this, something in your body has already begun to respond. Perhaps the shoulders have already dropped just a fraction of an inch. So small a movement that you would not notice unless someone mentioned it. Perhaps the jaw has loosened. Perhaps the space between your eyebrows has softened. Perhaps the hands, wherever they rest right now, have uncurled just enough to let the air touch the center of the palms. You are not doing this. This is what the body does when it hears that it is allowed to stop carrying. It does not need instructions. It only needs permission. And perhaps that is enough for now. Let us rest here for a moment. Take one slow breath. Feel the quiet weight of your body against whatever is holding you tonight. Notice what has already begun to soften since we started. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is another kind of weight I would like to explore with you. It is quieter than the others, and in some ways heavier. It is the weight we carry not in our hands or our minds, but in our hearts, the weight of the things we cannot forgive. There is a man I would like to tell you about. He was not a monk. He was not a teacher. He was a baker. He lived in a town built along a canal, in a narrow house with flour-dusted floors and windows that fogged up every morning from the heat of the ovens. The smell of bread was in everything, in the walls, in his clothes, in his hair, in the cracks between the floorboards. People who visited his shop said the smell alone was worth the walk. And this was true. It was the kind of smell that made you feel, for a moment, that the world was simpler than it actually was. He had been baking since he was 11 years old, when his father had placed his small hands on a mound of dough and said, "Push not with your arms, with your whole body." He had pushed, and the dough had yielded, and something in that yielding had felt like a conversation. The dough speaking back to him through his palms. He had loved it immediately. He had loved it every morning since, through seasons and years, and all the small changes that accumulate in a life without anyone noticing them arrive. The bakery opened at 5. He was there by 3:30, pulling the heavy iron door of the oven open, feeding the fire, waiting for the bricks to reach the temperature that only his forearm could measure. He would hold it near the opening and count. If he could count to 8 before the heat became unbearable, it was ready. His father had taught him that too. The bread he made was honest bread, dense, golden crusted, the kind that tore rather than sliced, the kind that filled a kitchen with warmth just by sitting on the counter. People came from 3 villages away for it. They said it tasted like someone cared, and they were right. Someone did, but for the past 3 years, the baker had not been sleeping, not entirely. He slept in pieces, an hour here, 40 minutes there, never enough to feel rested, never enough to dream. He would lie in bed in the dark and feel his jaw tighten and his hands curl into fists, and his mind begin its nightly journey to the same place it always went, to his brother, to the thing his brother had done, to the afternoon 3 years ago when he had discovered that the man he had trusted most in the world had been stealing from him. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, steadily, month after month, skimming money from the shop they had built together, the shop that bore their father's name. The betrayal was not the worst part. The worst part was that he had not seen it. The worst part was that while he had been kneading dough and greeting customers, and believing that they were partners, his brother had been quietly dismantling that belief, one receipt at a time. The worst part was the feeling of being foolish, of having loved someone who did not deserve it, or who deserved it but could not hold it, which somehow felt even worse. His brother had left town. There had been no apology, no explanation, no letter. Just absence, a hole in the shape of a person where a person used to be. And the baker carried it. He carried it the way you carry a stone in your shoe that you never stop to remove, not because you enjoy the pain, but because stopping would mean admitting that it hurts. He carried it into the shop every morning. He carried it into every loaf. He carried it to bed every night and set it on the pillow beside him and lay there, staring at it, until the ceiling began to lighten. And another day arrived without his permission. One winter evening, an old woman came into his shop just before closing. She was the kind of old woman who seemed to have been old for so long that no one could remember her being anything else. Her coat was patched in 3 places, and her shoes were worn thin at the heels, and her eyes had the particular clarity of someone who has seen enough of life to stop being surprised by any of it. She ordered a small loaf. He wrapped it for her. She did not leave. "You look tired," she said. "I am the kind of tired that sleep fixes, or the other kind." He looked at her. It was an unusual question from a stranger. Most people said "you look tired" the way they said "nice weather," as filler, not as inquiry. But she was looking at him the way a doctor looks at a patient, or the way a very old tree looks at the rain, steadily, without hurry, with no expectation that the answer would come quickly. "The other kind," he said. She nodded, as if this confirmed something she had already known. She sat down on the wooden bench by the window, where customers sometimes waited for their orders, settling herself with the unhurried care of someone who has learned that sitting down is a decision worth making properly. "Who are you angry at?" she asked. The baker set down the cloth he had been using to wipe the counter. "How did you know I was angry?" "Because your bread told me. It is good bread, some of the best I have tasted, but there is a tightness in it, in the way the crust holds on. Bread knows the hands that made it, and your hands are holding something they do not want to let go of." He leaned against the counter. "My brother," he said quietly. "I am angry at my brother." "For how long?" 3 years. "And in those 3 years, has the anger made anything better? Has it changed what happened? Has it brought him back, or made him sorry, or undone a single one of the things he did? No, then who is it punishing?" He did not answer. He did not need to. They both knew. The anger was not a weapon aimed at his brother. His brother was not here to receive it. The anger was a fire he tended every night in his own living room, warming no one, burning only himself. She unwrapped the loaf he had given her, tore off a small piece, and ate it slowly. "This is good bread," she said. "You can taste the care in it. But I wonder, can you taste the anger too? Because I think your hands know the difference, even if you do not." She paid for the loaf and left. The bell above the door rang once and then was still. The baker stood alone in his shop with flour on his apron, and the question she had left behind, sitting in the air like smoke. What the old woman was pointing toward, without ever using the word, is something the Buddha spoke about with great tenderness. He once said that holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. This is not a clever metaphor. It is a description of something that happens in the body, in the jaw, in the fists, in the chest that tightens at 3 in the morning when the mind returns to the scene of the wound. The fire is real, and the one holding it is always the one who suffers most. The Pali word is patiga, a kind of resistance, an inner striking against, not the loud anger of shouting and breaking things, but the quiet anger of replaying and rehearsing, and refusing to let the wound close. It is the anger that lives in the body, long after the mind has decided it is over. The anger that curls your hands while you sleep. Tonight, if you are carrying something like this, not necessarily toward a brother, perhaps toward a friend, a parent, a version of yourself, consider that the anger is not protecting you. It feels like armor. It feels like if you set it down, you would be saying that what happened was acceptable, that the hurt did not matter, that you are willing to be foolish again. But forgiveness is not any of those things. Forgiveness is not about the other person at all. It is about your hands. It is about whether you want to keep holding the coal or whether you are ready tonight to open your fingers and let the heat finally leave your skin. There was another person who learned this, though she learned it very differently and in a very different place. She was a weaver who lived at the foot of a mountain in a valley where the mist gathered every morning like a congregation and did not lift until the sun was well above the ridgeline. Her loom stood by the window that faced east, so that the first light of the day fell across the threads, like a blessing she had not asked for, but received anyway. The shuttle moved back and forth in her hands with the steadiness of breathing, in and out each pass, laying down another line of color in the cloth she was making. She had been a weaver for 22 years, and in that time she had made cloth for weddings and funerals, for babies and for the old, for curtains and tablecloths, and the simple wrapping cloths that people used to carry their belongings when they traveled. Her hands were rough from the fibers, the fingertips grooved with tiny lines, where the threads had pressed their patterns into her skin. She did not mind. The roughness felt like evidence, proof that she had done something with her days. But there was one piece of cloth she could not finish. It had been on the loom for almost a year now, a blanket, large, meant for a bed, meant for warmth. She had started it with dark thread, navy and charcoal, and a deep burgundy that looked almost black in certain lights. The pattern was tight and dense and angry, though she would not have used that word. She would have said it was serious. She would have said it was strong. She had started it the week after her daughter stopped speaking to her. The argument had been about something small, so small that she could no longer remember exactly what had started it. Something about a holiday, something about a choice the daughter had made that the mother could not accept. The words had escalated the way words do when two people love each other too much to be careful. And by the end of the evening, something had broken that neither of them knew how to repair. The daughter had left. She had not called. She had not written. She had simply stepped out of her mother's life the way you step out of a room. One moment there, the next moment gone, and the mother had sat down at her loom and begun to weave. The blanket grew slowly, row by row, the dark threads accumulating like days. She wove her hurt into it. She wove her righteous indignation into it. She wove the list of things she had done right, and the list of things her daughter had done wrong. She wove the silence into it, every unanswered phone call, every birthday that passed without a word, every holiday she spent alone at a table set for one. An old monk came through the valley in the spring. He was known in the region as someone who listened well. Not a teacher, exactly, but a man who sat with people and their difficulties, the way a gardener sits with soil, patiently, without trying to rush what was growing. He visited the weaver. He saw the blanket on the loom. "Who is it for?" he asked. "My daughter. Will you give it to her?" The weaver's hands stopped moving for the first time in hours. "She will not accept anything from me." "Then who are you weaving it for?" The weaver looked at the dark cloth, at the tight, angry pattern, at the year of pain woven into every row. "I do not know," she whispered. "I think I have been weaving my anger into something I can hold. Because if I stop weaving, I will have to feel how much I miss her. And the missing is worse than the anger. The anger has edges. The missing has none." The monk said nothing for a long while. Outside, the mist had begun to thin, and thin columns of sunlight were finding their way through the trees. A bird sang, just one, high and clear, like a single thread of sound laid across the silence. Then he spoke very gently. Shunryu Suzuki once said that, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. Perhaps you have become an expert in your anger. You know every thread of it. You know its pattern and its weight and its color. But what would happen if you approached your daughter the way you approached the loom for the very first time? Not knowing the outcome, not needing to be right, just willing to sit down and begin. The weaver did not unravel the blanket that night. But she did something she had not done in a year. She took the dark thread off the shuttle and replaced it with something lighter, a pale blue, the color of morning sky before the sun fully rises. She did not know what she was making anymore. She did not know if her daughter would ever see it. But the cloth began to change. And changing the cloth felt, in some small way, like the first breath after holding one for a very long time. There is a story told in many traditions about a farmer who found a dead bird in his field. It was a small bird, brown and unremarkable, the kind that fills the morning with song and is otherwise invisible. It lay on its side in the furrow between two rows of beans, its eyes closed, its wings folded against its body, as though it had simply decided to stop flying and rest. The farmer picked it up and put it in his pocket. He meant to bury it later, when the day's work was done. But later became tomorrow, and tomorrow became next week, and next week became a month. And somewhere in that slow accumulation of postponed intentions, carrying the bird became a habit. He no longer noticed. His wife asked him why his coat smelled strange. His children moved to the other side of the table, at meals. His friends stopped walking beside him. "Why do you keep it?" a neighbor finally asked. "Because I found it," the farmer said. "Because it was in my field. Because it feels like mine now. But it is dead," the neighbor said gently. "It has been dead since the day you found it. The only thing keeping it here is your pocket." The farmer looked down at his coat, at the small weight he had been carrying without thinking about, and he realized that somewhere along the way he had confused holding something with honoring it. He had confused carrying something with caring about it. He buried the bird that evening in the soft earth at the edge of his field, where the wildflowers grew in spring, and his pocket was empty. And the emptiness did not feel like loss. It felt like air. Pema Chodron, a Buddhist teacher, known for her extraordinary gentleness, once wrote that nothing ever goes away until it has taught us what we need to know. Perhaps the anger you carry has been trying to teach you something, not about the person who hurt you. You already know that story by heart, but about you. About the tenderness underneath the anger, about the love that the anger is trying to protect, about the part of you that is still, after all this time, hoping that things could be different. Tonight you do not need to forgive anyone. That is not a task for a night like this. But perhaps you can do something smaller. Perhaps you can notice the weight of what you carry, not to judge it. Not to fix it, just to notice. The way you might notice that your shoulders have climbed up toward your ears without you asking them to. The way you might notice that your jaw has been clenched for so long that relaxing it feels strange, almost wrong. Like setting down something you have held so long that your hand has forgotten its own shape. Just notice, that is all. The noticing is enough. The noticing is always where it begins. Let us rest here for a moment. The night has deepened since we started. The air is quieter now. Take a slow breath and feel where your body meets the surface beneath you. Feel the weight of yourself, not as a burden, but as something the earth is willing to hold for you. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is something else I would like to share with you tonight. It has nothing to do with forgiveness and everything to do with the restless mind, the mind that will not be still, the mind that replays and rehearses and refuses to let the day end. There was a watchmaker who lived above his shop in a town where the church bells rang every hour and the pigeons had learned to scatter at the sound. His workshop was a small room at the top of a narrow staircase with a single window that looked out over the rooftops toward the hills. The walls were lined with shelves, and the shelves were lined with clocks, mantel clocks, wall clocks, pocket watches in velvet cases, grandfather clock movements laid open like patients on an operating table. The sound of them was extraordinary, not loud exactly, but layered. 100 different rhythms ticking at once, some fast, some slow, some with a slight catch in their mechanism that gave them a syncopated heartbeat, as if they were clocks that had learned to swing. The light in the workshop changed throughout the day in ways the watchmaker knew by heart. At 7 in the morning, it came through the window at a low angle and touched the brass gears on his workbench, turning them into small suns. By noon, it had climbed to the ceiling and lay flat across the plaster, like a white sheet. By 4, it was gone, and he worked by the light of a single lamp, with a green glass shade that cast everything in the color of still water. His hands were remarkable. They could hold a gear the size of a grain of rice between thumb and forefinger and set it into place without trembling. They could feel the difference between a spring wound, one turned too tight, and one wound correctly. They could diagnose what was wrong with a clock simply by holding it, the way a doctor in an old story might diagnose illness by touching a wrist. His hands were patient, precise and absolutely still, but his mind was not. His mind was a different kind of mechanism entirely, one that did not keep time, but raced ahead of it, or fell behind it, or spun in circles around the same hour, like a hand that had come loose from its post. He thought about everything, not in the useful way that a person thinks when solving a problem, but in the restless way that a dog circles a room, sniffing corners it has already sniffed, checking doors it has already checked, unable to settle, because settling requires a kind of trust that the mind, left to itself, does not naturally possess. He replayed conversations from weeks ago, editing his responses, sharpening his wit, defending positions no one was attacking. He rehearsed conversations that had not yet happened and might never happen. Arguments with his landlord, negotiations with suppliers, apologies he might one day need to offer for offenses he had not yet committed. He lay in bed at night, and his mind presented him with a list of every task he had not completed, every bill he had not paid, every promise he had not kept, every small failure that the daylight had been kind enough to obscure, but the darkness now illuminated with merciless clarity. The irony was not lost on him. His hands could make a clock run perfectly, each gear in its place, each spring wound to exactly the right tension, each mechanism ticking in time. But the mechanism inside his own skull was another matter entirely. It did not tick. It raced, it stuttered. It ran backward and forward and sideways all at once, like a clock with too many hands and no face to put them on. His wife, before she left, had said something he could not forget. She had said, "You are never here. Your body is here, but you are always somewhere else. Somewhere that has already happened, or somewhere that has not happened yet. I cannot live with a man who is never in the room he is standing in." He had wanted to argue. He had wanted to say that he was there, that he had always been there. But even as the words formed in his mind, he knew she was right. He was not there. He had not been there for years. His hands were in the room. His mind was in a different country. He was in the language of the Buddha, caught in what is sometimes called papanka, the mind's tendency to proliferate, to take one thought and spin it into 10, to take 10 and spin them into 100, not because the 100 thoughts are needed, but because the spinning itself has become the mind's default state, its resting position, its idol, the thing it does when no one is asking it to do anything else. One afternoon, a woman brought in a clock that had belonged to her grandmother. It was a small brass carriage clock with a cracked face and a mechanism that had seized. She wanted it repaired, not for the time it kept, but for the hands that had once wounded it. The watchmaker took it apart carefully, the way you might undress a wound, slowly, gently with attention to what lies beneath. He laid each piece on a square of white cloth, the mainspring coiled like a sleeping snake, the escape wheel with its precisely angled teeth, the balance wheel that swung back and forth like a tiny pendulum, the jeweled bearings no bigger than the period at the end of a sentence, ruby red and polished to a shine that caught the lamplight and held it. Laid out this way, the clock looked like a small universe, ordered, purposeful, each part dependent on every other part, each part useless without the whole. The problem was immediately clear. A piece of dust, so small that it was barely visible even under his magnifying glass, had lodged itself between two gears. The mechanism was perfect. The design was sound. The springs had years of life left in them, but this single grain of dust had brought everything to a halt. He removed it with a needle. He cleaned the gears with a brush so fine that its bristles were softer than eyelashes. He reassembled the clock, he wound it, and it began to tick again, steady, even unhurried, as though it had never stopped. He sat looking at it for a long time. It was not broken, he said to no one. It was just stuck. And for a moment, just a moment, he wondered if the same might be true of his mind. Not broken, not faulty, not in need of replacement or repair, just stuck, just caught on a grain of something too small to see, too small to name, but large enough to stop everything from moving the way it was designed to move. You know this mind. You may be lying here tonight with exactly this mind, the one that will not stop, the one that reviews the day as though it were evidence in a trial, the one that takes a single worry and examines it from every angle, turning it over and over the way the watchmaker turns a gear, looking for the flaw, looking for the fix, never finding either, because the examining itself is the problem. The Buddha understood this with great precision. He did not call the thinking mind broken or bad. He called it untrained, the way a puppy is untrained, not because it is defective, but because no one has shown it where to rest. And training in the Buddha's understanding was not about force. It was about gentleness, about noticing, about the quiet, patient act of bringing the attention back and back and back again, the way you might bring a wandering child back to the path, not with a shout, but with a hand on the shoulder and a voice that says, "This way, we are going this way." There was a girl. She could not have been older than 16 or 17, who worked in her uncle's tea house in a village built around a natural hot spring. The steam from the spring drifted through the village at all hours, so that walking down the main street was like walking through a cloud that smelled faintly of minerals and warm stone. The tea house sat at the end of this street, a low wooden building with sliding doors and a floor of woven mats that had been walked on so many times they had taken on the smooth golden color of old honey. Ferns grew in clay pots by the entrance, and the steam from the spring kept them green all year. Even in winter, when everything else had gone brown and bare, inside the air was always warm, and the light that came through the paper screens was soft and diffused, as though the building itself had decided that sharpness was not welcome here. The girl served tea. That was her entire job. She carried the lacquered tray from the kitchen to the tables and back again, dozens of times each day, walking the same path across the same floor, pouring from the same ceramic pot into the same small cups. Her feet knew every creak in the floorboards. Her hands knew the exact angle at which to tilt the pot so that the tea flowed in a thin, steady stream without splashing. Her body had memorized the work completely. It no longer needed her mind to participate at all. And so her mind had gone elsewhere. It had packed its bags and left her body standing in the tea house and gone traveling to every corner of her life that was not this floor, this tray, this pot, this cup. While she poured tea, she thought about what she should have said to the boy at the market that morning, the one who had smiled at her and asked about the chrysanthemums. And she had said something awkward about the weather and then replayed the moment 40 times, each time finding a better answer, a cleverer response, a version of herself that was quicker and more charming than the version that had actually shown up. While she wiped the tables, she rehearsed what she would say to her mother about wanting to leave the village, crafting arguments, anticipating objections, having an entire conversation with a person who was not in the room. While she swept the floor, she imagined futures, bright ones and terrible ones, futures in which she lived in a city and wore beautiful clothes and read books all day, and futures in which she was still here at 40, still carrying the same tray across the same floor, her feet wearing new grooves into the mats beside her mother's grooves and her grandmother's grooves before that. The futures branched and split and multiplied until her head ached with the weight of lives she had not yet lived and might never live. Her uncle watched this. He was a quiet man who had run the tea house for 30 years and had learned in that time that most of what needs to be said can be said without words. He watched the girl move through the room with her body in one place and her mind in another, and he recognized it because he had been the same way once, long ago, before a very old teacher had shown him something he had never forgotten. One evening, after the last customer had left and the girl was washing cups in the back kitchen, he sat down beside her. "How many cups did you wash today?" he asked. "I do not know, perhaps 80, perhaps 100. "And while you washed them, where were you?" She looked at him, confused. "I was here." "Your hands were here," he said gently. "But where was your mind?" She was quiet. She looked down at the cup in her hands, a simple brown cup with a chip on the rim that she had washed 1,000 times before. And she realized she had never actually looked at it, not once, not in all the months she had been washing it. Her hands had held it, but her eyes had always been somewhere else. Her mind had always been somewhere else. "My mind was everywhere," she said. Her uncle nodded. An old Zen master, Dogen, once wrote that when you wash the cup, wash the cup. He did not mean this as a rule. He meant it as a kindness to yourself, because the mind that is everywhere is a mind that is nowhere, and a mind that is nowhere is a mind that cannot rest. He picked up a cup and held it under the water. "Feel the water," he said. "Feel the temperature of it. Feel the weight of the cup. Feel the smoothness of the glaze under your thumb. This is not meditation. This is not a practice. This is simply being where you are instead of where you are not. The girl held the cup. She felt the warm water running over her fingers. She felt the curve of the ceramic against her palm. She felt the small chip on the rim, a tiny roughness in an otherwise smooth surface. And for a moment, just a moment, her mind stopped running. Not because she told it to stop. Not because she forced it, but because there was something real under her fingers. Something actual and present and warm. And the reality of it was enough to call her attention home, the way a porch light calls a traveler home on a dark road. She did not become a different person that evening. The next morning, her mind was running again, before she had finished dressing, already at the market, already in the future, already somewhere that was not the room she was standing in. But she had the cup now. She had the memory of what it felt like to be exactly where she was, with warm water on her hands, and the solid curve of ceramic against her palm. And every time the mind began its endless circuit of worry and rehearsal and projection, she could return to the cup, to the warmth, to the weight, to the small rough chip on the rim that said, "Here you are, this is real," and for a breath or two, sometimes 3, she could find the still point at the center of all that spinning. And a breath or two, it turns out, is enough. It has always been enough. There is a story, very short, almost nothing, the kind of story that a teacher might tell in the time it takes to pour a cup of tea, about a master who was asked by a student to write down the highest wisdom. The master picked up his brush, dipped it in ink, and wrote one word on a sheet of paper. The student looked at the single word and was disappointed. "Is that all?" he asked. "Surely the highest wisdom requires more than one word. Will you not add something?" The master picked up the brush again and wrote, "Attention, attention." The student grew frustrated. "I do not see any depth or subtlety in what you have written. Anyone could write the same word 3 times. The master smiled, not unkindly, and wrote one final time, "Attention, attention, attention." And then he set down the brush and said, "Attention is the whole of it. Attention means attention. This is not about concentration. It is not about forcing the mind into a box. It is about the gentlest possible redirection. The way you might notice that your attention has wandered from the breath you are breathing right now, and bring it back without scolding, without judgment, without the additional thought that says, 'I should not have wandered.' The wandering is not the failure. Believing that you should not wander, that is the only failure. And even that is not really a failure. It is just another thought. Tonight, lying here, you do not need to stop your mind. You could not even if you tried, and trying would only create another layer of thinking. Thinking about not thinking, worrying about worrying, the mind watching the mind. Watch the mind in an endless hall of mirrors. Instead, consider this. Your body is here. Your body has been here this whole time, while the mind raced ahead and fell behind and circled and spun. Your body has been lying on this surface, breathing this air, feeling the weight of the blanket, the temperature of the room, the quiet pressure of gravity, holding you gently against the earth. The mind may be everywhere, but the body is always right here. And right here is a place you can rest. Perhaps you notice it now, the way the chest rises and falls without being asked, the way the breath comes in cool and leaves warm, the way each exhale is slightly longer than the inhale, as though the body is teaching itself to slow down one breath at a time. You are not doing this. It is being done. It has been being done since the moment you were born, and it will continue without your supervision, without your worry, without your oversight. The body knows how to breathe. The body knows how to rest. The mind is the one that has forgotten. Let us rest here now. Let the thoughts come if they come. Let them go if they go. They are only weather, passing through, changing nothing, leaving the sky exactly as it was. When you are ready, we will continue together. The next story takes us somewhere different. It is about a weight that many of us carry without knowing its name. The weight of believing that we are not enough. There is a weight that almost no one talks about. It is not the weight of grief or anger or worry. Those weights at least have names. People understand them. They nod when you describe them. They offer sympathy and advice and cups of tea. But this weight has no name that most people would recognize, and so it gets carried in silence, year after year, hidden beneath achievement and effort, and the relentless pursuit of becoming something other than what you already are. It is the weight of believing you are not enough, not smart enough, not kind enough, not successful enough, not thin enough, not patient enough, not brave enough, not good enough at the things you are supposed to be good at, not far enough along the road you are supposed to be walking. It is a weight you probably picked up very early, so early that you cannot remember a time before it was there. The way you cannot remember learning to breathe or learning to be afraid of the dark. It was given to you by a look, by a silence, by a comparison, by a report card, by a mirror, by a careless word, from someone who did not know they were building a cage, by the space between what you were told you should be and what you quietly knew you were. And you have been carrying it ever since. Not because it is true, but because you were too young when it was given to you to know that you could hand it back. There is a very old parable about a tiger who was raised by goats. When the tiger was a cub, barely days old, it was separated from its mother during a storm and found the next morning by a herd of goats grazing at the edge of a forest. The goats did what goats do. They accepted what was in front of them without asking too many questions. They fed the cub. They let it sleep among them. They did not tell it that it was a tiger, because goats do not think in those categories. They simply raised it as one of their own. The tiger grew. It ate grass, though grass gave it no nourishment. It bleated though. The sound that came out was strange and low, and nothing like a bleat. It walked with its head down, the way goats walk, and it flinched at loud noises, the way goats flinch. It believed with absolute conviction that it was a small and timid creature, whose purpose was to stay with the herd and not attract attention. One day an old tiger emerged from the forest. The goats scattered. The young tiger scattered with them, trembling, pressing itself against a rock. The old tiger looked at this strange creature, this tiger who ran with goats, who ate grass, who trembled at the sight of its own kind, and felt something that might have been sadness, or perhaps recognition. "Come with me," the old tiger said. "I cannot, I am a goat. I must stay with the herd." The old tiger said nothing. It simply led the young one to a still pool at the edge of the forest and said, "Look." The young tiger looked into the water, and for the first time in its life, it saw its own face. Not a goat's face, not a small face. A tiger's face, broad and golden and powerful, with eyes that held a depth the young tiger had never imagined it possessed. "You were never a goat," the old tiger said. "You were never small. You were never meant to eat grass and tremble at shadows. You simply forgot what you were. And forgetting is not the same as not being." The Buddha spoke about this kind of forgetting with great compassion. He called the essential nature that lives beneath all our confusion our Buddha nature. Not a thing to be earned or achieved, but a thing that is already present. The way the sun is already present behind clouds. You do not create the sun by clearing the clouds. You simply stop believing it is not there. There was a carpenter who lived in a village by the sea. His workshop was a converted boathouse at the end of a wooden dock that extended out over the water, so that when the tide was high, the floor seemed to float, and when the tide was low, you could see the barnacles and seaweed clinging to the pilings below. The air in the workshop always smelled of salt and sawdust, two smells that should not have belonged together, but somehow did, the way unlikely friendships sometimes do. He built things that people needed: chairs, tables, window frames, the wooden boxes that fishermen used to carry their catch to market. His work was solid and well made. The joints were tight. The surfaces were smooth. The proportions were correct. No one who bought a chair from him ever brought it back. No one who sat in one ever thought about the chair at all, which is, if you think about it, the highest compliment a chair can receive. To be so right that it disappears beneath the person sitting in it. But the carpenter did not see it this way. He saw every flaw, every grain that did not run perfectly straight, every joint that was tight but not tight enough, every surface that was smooth but could, with another hour of sanding, have been smoother. He looked at his work the way a harsh critic looks at a painting, not seeing what was there, but seeing only what was missing, what fell short, what could have been better, if only he had been better. His father had been a carpenter too, a brilliant one, by all accounts. The kind of carpenter whose work people kept for generations. The kind whose name was spoken with a respect that bordered on reverence. The carpenter had grown up in the shadow of this name, measuring himself against it every day, the way a child measures their height against a mark on the wall, and every day finding themselves still short of it. He worked longer hours than anyone in the village. He started before the gulls woke and finished after the stars appeared. He told himself that this was dedication. He told himself that this was craft, but underneath the dedication and the craft was something else, a quiet, persistent belief that he was not yet good enough, and that if he stopped working, if he rested, if he allowed himself to be satisfied, the gap between himself and his father's name would become visible, and everyone would see what he had always suspected, that he was ordinary, that he was just a man who made chairs. One morning an old fisherman brought him a broken oar. The blade had cracked, a clean split down the center, the kind of damage that happens when wood meets rock at the wrong angle. "Can you fix it?" the fisherman asked. The carpenter examined it. The wood was old, dense and dark with years of salt water. It had been a good oar once. He could see in the grain and the shape of the blade the hands that had made it. "My father made this oar," he said quietly. "I know," the fisherman said. "That is why I brought it to you." The carpenter turned it over in his hands. He ran his thumb along the crack, and he noticed something he had never noticed before. The oar was not perfect. The blade was slightly uneven, one side a fraction thicker than the other. The handle had a rough spot near the grip where the tool had slipped. The finish in one small area near the base was uneven, as though the hand that applied it had been tired, or cold, or simply human. His father's work was not perfect. It had never been perfect. It had simply been good enough to last 30 years on the open water, good enough to carry a fisherman through storms and calms and ordinary Tuesdays when the sea was flat and grey, and nothing happened. Worth remembering. Good enough to be worth bringing to a stranger's workshop for repair, rather than replacing with something new. The carpenter sat with the oar in his lap for a long time. The tide came in beneath his feet. The water made its quiet sounds against the pilings. A gentle knocking, as if the sea were politely asking to come in. I think I have been comparing myself to something that never existed, he said. I built my father into something perfect in my mind, and then I spent my whole life failing to reach a standard that was never real. The fisherman looked at him with the steady gaze of a man who has spent decades watching the horizon. Your father was a good carpenter, he said, but he was not a god. He was a man who got tired and made mistakes, and sometimes went home early because his back hurt. I know this because I watched him work for 20 years. The oar is proof. It is beautiful, and it is flawed, and it lasted 30 years. That is not perfection. That is something much more useful. That is care. The carpenter ran his thumb along the crack one more time. Then he picked up his tools and began the repair. And for the first time, in as long as he could remember, he worked without measuring himself against anything. He simply worked. And the work was enough. The Buddha once said something very simple about this. He said, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. This is not a motivational poster. This is not a platitude. This is one of the most radical things anyone has ever said. Because the mind that measures and compares and finds itself lacking, that mind does not believe it. That mind says, yes, but you do not know my flaws. You do not know the distance between what I am and what I should be. And the Buddha, with infinite patience, says back, I know, and you still deserve your love. There is a koan, very short, almost a whisper, that has been passed between teachers and students for centuries. A student says to the master, I am nothing. The master says, who told you that? The student says, no one told me. I have always known it. And the master says, then you have always been wrong. But that is all right. Being wrong is also allowed. Tonight, if you are lying here with the weight of not enough pressing on your chest, the feeling that you should be further along, that you should have done more, that you should somehow be other than exactly what you are right now, in this moment breathing this breath, consider that this weight was placed on you. It was not born in you. It was given to you by a world that measures and compares and ranks, by voices that said, quietly or loudly, not yet, not quite, almost but not enough. And a weight that was placed on you can be set down. There was a woman who tended a garden behind a temple. She had come to the temple not as a student of the Dharma, not as someone seeking enlightenment or wisdom or even peace, but as someone who needed somewhere to go. Her marriage had ended. Her children were grown and lived far away. The apartment she had shared with her husband for 26 years now belonged to someone else, and she had arrived at the temple gates with a suitcase and a feeling she could not articulate. The feeling that she had been subtracted from her own life, one piece at a time, until what remained was not quite a person anymore, but the outline of where a person used to be. The abbess had looked at her for a long time, and then said, do you know anything about gardens? No, good, then you will learn without opinions. The garden was small, perhaps 30 paces from one end to the other, but it contained, in that modest space, a kind of wilderness that the woman had not expected. There were vegetables and herbs and flowers, all growing together in what appeared to be chaos. But what she gradually came to understand a carefully designed disorder. Tomatoes climbed the same stakes as morning glories. Basil grew in the shade of sunflowers. Marigolds edged the bean rows, not for beauty, but because their smell kept the beetles away. She worked in the garden every day. She weeded, she watered. She learned to tell the difference between a seedling and a weed by the shape of its first leaves. A distinction that, in the beginning, seemed impossible, and, after a few weeks, seemed obvious. She learned that soil is not dirt, but a living thing, full of organisms she could not see, doing work she would never fully understand, turning death into life in the quiet darkness below the surface. One afternoon she pulled a carrot from the ground. It was her first harvest, a single carrot, not particularly large, slightly crooked, with a fork at the bottom where it had encountered a stone and split in two directions rather than growing straight. She held it in her dirty hands and looked at it. "It is not very good," she said to the abbess, who was sitting on a bench nearby. Reading, the abbess looked up. "What makes you say that?" "It is small and crooked. The ones at the market are straight and orange and perfect." The ones at the market were bred for appearance, the abbess said. They were grown in soil that was forced to produce them. They were shaped by expectation. They are perfect carrots in the same way that a word on a page is a perfect word, technically correct, but missing the thing that makes it alive. She paused. "Your carrot grew in real soil. It met a stone and found a way around it. It is not perfect. It is something better than perfect." "It is true." The woman looked at the carrot again. At its crookedness, at the split where the stone had been, at the dirt still clinging to its skin. And for the first time in years, perhaps for the first time in her life, she felt something shift inside her. Not a great awakening, not a revelation, more like a key turning in a lock that had been stuck so long she had forgotten it was a lock at all. She had been the crooked carrot. She had been measuring herself against the straight ones at the market her entire life, against the women who seemed to have it together, against the mothers who never lost their patience, against the wives whose marriages did not end, against some imaginary version of herself that was smoother, straighter, more presentable. And she had found herself wanting every time because the measurement was wrong, not because she was wrong, but because the ruler was wrong. She had been using someone else's ruler to measure a life that could only be measured by its own. She took the carrot inside that evening and cooked it in a simple broth with onions and salt. It was by any standard just a carrot, but it tasted like something she had grown herself from seed in soil she had tended with her own imperfect hands. And that taste, the taste of something real, something earned, something that bore the marks of its own becoming, was sweeter than any perfect carrot she had ever bought from anyone. Thich Nhat Hanh said it with the simplicity of someone who has looked at this truth for a very long time. To be beautiful means to be yourself. You do not need to be accepted by others. You need to accept yourself. This is not about self-improvement. This is about self-arrival, about arriving at the place where you already are and recognizing, perhaps for the first time, that it is enough, that you are enough, not because you have achieved enough or suffered enough or changed enough, but because enough was never the right question. The right question was always, are you here? And the answer tonight is yes. Perhaps you feel it now, a softening somewhere behind the ribs, in that place where the weight of self-judgment usually sits like a closed fist. Perhaps it has not opened. Perhaps it will not open tonight. But perhaps it has loosened, just slightly, The way a knot loosens when you stop pulling at it and simply let it rest in warm water. You do not need to untie anything tonight. You only need to stop pulling. The warmth will do the rest in its own time, in its own way, the way all things heal when they are finally left alone. Let us rest here now. You have traveled far tonight, further than you may know. Take a breath that does not try to be anything. Let it be shallow if it wants to be shallow. Let it be deep if it wants to be deep. Your breath is also enough, exactly as it is. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is one more kind of holding I would like to explore with you. It is the holding that happens not with the hands or the heart, but with time, the way we grip what has already passed and will not let it become the past. There was a man who kept a photograph in his wallet. It was an old photograph, the kind printed on thick paper that yellows at the edges, the kind that bends and softens, with years of being folded and unfolded and held up to the light. The photograph showed a house, a small house with a blue door and a garden where tomatoes grew against the south-facing wall, and a clothesline stretched between two wooden poles where sheets dried in the wind. It was the house where he had grown up, the house where his mother had taught him to tie his shoes on the front step, the house where his father had built a tree house in the old oak that was nothing more than 3 boards and a rope ladder, but felt, to a boy of 7, like a castle in the sky. The house where he had kissed a girl for the first time, in the kitchen, while the radio played something he could no longer remember, and the light through the window had turned everything amber, and the world had been so full of possibility that his chest had ached with it. The house was gone now. It had been gone for 11 years. The land had been sold after his parents died. First his father, quietly in his sleep, the way he had done everything. And then his mother, 6 months later, as though she had simply been waiting for permission to follow. The garden had been ploughed under, the oak cut down. He had driven past one day and seen the stump, pale and wide as a table, counting its rings in the rain. The blue door had been removed and replaced with something modern and grey that looked efficient and clean and had no memory at all. Someone else lived there now, someone who had never heard the sound his mother's slippers made on the kitchen floor at 6 in the morning, someone who did not know that if you stood at the back window on a clear evening, you could see the last light catch the weather vane on the church steeple and turn it to gold, someone who walked through rooms that held no echo for them, who slept beneath a ceiling that had once been the entire sky of a boy's entire world. And the man carried the photograph everywhere. He carried it to work in his breast pocket, where he could feel its edges through the fabric of his shirt. He carried it to the grocery store. He carried it to dinner parties, where he told no one about it. He carried it to bed at night and set it on the nightstand like a prayer. He took it out sometimes and looked at it, the way a person looks at a map of a country that no longer exists, with a tenderness that borders on grief, with a longing that has no object, because the thing being longed for is not a place but a time, and time cannot be returned to, no matter how carefully you preserve the photograph. His wife had asked him, gently, more than once, why he kept it. The house is gone, she said. Looking at the picture does not bring it back. I know, he said. Then why he was quiet for a long time. He turned the photograph over in his hands, feeling the soft edges where the paper had worn thin. Because if I put it away, he said, then it really is gone. And if it is really gone, then that part of my life is really over, and I am not ready for it to be really over. She reached across the table and put her hand on his She did not tell him he was wrong. She did not tell him to let go. She simply said, "The house is gone, but you are still here. And you are the one who remembers the tomatoes and the treehouse and all of it. You are the living version of that photograph. You do not need the paper to prove that it happened." He looked at her, and something in him recognized the truth of what she was saying, even though another part of him was not ready to act on it. The photograph stayed in his wallet that night. It stayed for another month, and then, one morning, quietly without ceremony, he took it out and placed it in a drawer, not in the trash, not in a fire, just in a drawer, where it could rest without being carried, where it could exist without being held. What the man was learning, slowly and in his own way, is something the Buddha spoke about more than almost any other subject. The Pali word is anicca, impermanence, the understanding that everything that arises also passes away, not as punishment, not as tragedy, simply as the nature of things. The river flows, the seasons turn, the child becomes an adult, the house with the blue door becomes a memory, and the memory becomes a photograph, and the photograph becomes a thing you carry in your wallet until the day you realize that carrying it does not stop the passing, only stops you from being present to what is here now, in this moment, still alive, still unfolding, still yours. This teaching is not about loss. That is the misunderstanding most people bring to it. They hear impermanence, and they hear everything you love will be taken from you. But the Buddha did not teach it that way. He taught it as a doorway to loving things more fully, not less. Because when you know that the flower will wilt, you look at the flower. When you know that the evening will end, you sit in the evening. When you know that the person beside you will not be beside you forever, you turn toward them. Impermanence does not take love away. It makes love urgent. It makes love real. It makes love the only reasonable response to a world where nothing stays. Tonight, if you are holding on to something that has already passed, a relationship, a version of yourself, a home, a time of life that was good and is now over, you are not foolish for holding on. You are human. The heart does not let go the way the hand lets go. The hand opens and the object falls and it is done. The heart opens and the thing it held is still there, hovering, glowing, refusing to leave. Letting go for the heart is not a single act. It is a season. It is a slow thought. It is the gradual, almost imperceptible softening that happens when you stop insisting that things should be other than they are. There was a woman who lived in a village where the river froze every winter. She had been a teacher at the village school for 31 years, 3 decades of chalk dust and small hands, and the particular chaos of a room full of children learning to read. She had been good at it. Not good in the way that wins awards or attracts attention, but good in the way that matters. Good in the way that changes the shape of a child's life, without the child ever knowing it was being shaped. She remembered every student, not every name, the names blurred after 3 decades, but every face, every struggle, every moment when the light came on behind a child's eyes, and something that had been impossible a moment before suddenly was not. She had retired in the spring, on a Friday, because Fridays felt like natural endings. The school had given her a small ceremony in the library, between the biography shelf and the encyclopedias, that no one used anymore. Her colleagues had made speeches. The principal had called her irreplaceable, which was kind but not true. Someone would replace her on Monday, and the children would adjust within a week, because children are made of a material that bends. Someone had bought a cake with her name on it, spelled correctly, which she appreciated more than the speeches. She had smiled and thanked everyone, and carried her box of belongings, a coffee mug, a wooden ruler, a photograph of her first class, a small cactus that had survived 31 years on a windowsill, with almost no attention to the car, and driven home. She had sat in the kitchen and made herself a cup of tea. The clock on the wall said 2:15. The house was silent in a way it had never been silent before. Not the silence of evening, which is restful, but the silence of a weekday afternoon, which is empty. And she realized, with a clarity that felt like stepping off a cliff into air that was not sure whether to hold her, that she did not know who she was without the classroom. For 31 years, she had been the teacher. She had been the person who arrived first and left last. The person who knew where the extra pencils were kept. The person who could quiet a room with a look and start a riot of laughter with a single word. She had been necessary. She had been known, and now she was a woman sitting in a kitchen at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon with nothing to do and no one expecting her to do it. The grief surprised her. It arrived without warning, the way weather arrives in open country. One moment the sky is clear, the next moment there is rain, and you did not see it coming because you were looking in the wrong direction. She had not expected to grieve a job. People grieve deaths and divorces and diagnoses. Those are the losses that come with rituals and sympathy cards and casseroles left on the doorstep. No one brings a casserole for a retirement. Retirement is supposed to be a gift, a reward, a beginning. The gold watch, the freedom, the rest you have earned. But it did not feel like a beginning. It felt like an ending that no one had warned her would hurt this much. It felt like being erased from a chalkboard, one long sweep of the eraser, and the equations that had taken years to write were simply gone. She started going back to the school. Not officially. There was no reason to go back officially. She was retired. The word itself felt like a door closing. She would drive past it on errands that did not need to be run, taking the long route to the pharmacy, the long route to the post office, always the route that passed the school. She would slow down as she approached the playground, watch the children at recess through the chain-link fence, the way they ran without destination, the way they argued and made up and argued again in the span of 30 seconds, the way they shouted each other's names across the blacktop, as though naming someone was the most important thing a voice could do. She would sit in the parking lot sometimes, in the same space she had parked in for 31 years, with the engine off and the windows down, just listening. The distant sound of voices, small voices, high and urgent, and full of things that needed to be said right now, this very second, before the bell rang and the moment was lost. Sometimes she could hear a teacher, the new one, her replacement, calling the class to line up, and the children would line up, more or less in the way that children line up, which is to say, not really in a line at all, but in a shape that approximates a line if you squint and are generous. She sat there one afternoon for 45 minutes. When she drove home, her eyes were wet, though she would not have called it crying. She would have called it remembering. Her daughter noticed, because daughters notice everything, especially the things their mothers try to hide. Mama, you cannot keep going back there. I am not going back. I am just driving past. You are sitting in the parking lot. Mrs. Hernandez saw you last Tuesday. I was resting. It is a quiet parking lot. Her daughter sat down beside her at the kitchen table. She had her mother's eyes, the same steady gaze, the same patience, the same ability to wait for the truth to arrive on its own schedule, rather than demanding it show up on time. "What are you afraid of?" she asked. The teacher looked at her hands, at the chalk stains that were finally fading after months of washing, at the fingers that had held 1,000 pencils and tied 1,000 shoelaces and wiped more tears than she could count. "That I was only the teacher," she said, "that without the classroom, there is nothing left of me. That the part of me that mattered, the part that was needed, the part that was known, was the part that stood in front of 30 children every morning and said, 'Good morning, let us begin.' And now there is no one to say it to, and the words just sit in my mouth with nowhere to go." Her daughter reached across the table and took her mother's hands, hands that had held chalk and pencils and small confused fingers, learning to write the letter R, which is harder than it looks. She held them the way her mother had once held hers. "You are still the person who says, 'Let us begin,'" she said. "You just have not found out yet what you are beginning." Dogen, the great Zen master, once wrote that time is not a line moving from past to future. Time, he said, is a series of moments, each one complete in itself, each one containing everything that has ever been and everything that will ever be. The past is not behind you. It is inside you. The teacher is inside the retired woman. The child is inside the adult. The house with the blue door is inside the man who carries the photograph. Nothing is truly lost. It has simply changed form, the way water changes from ice to liquid to vapor, without ever ceasing to be water. There is a very small story, more an image than a story, really, about a monk who spent every autumn watching the maple tree outside his window. He watched it turn from green to gold to red to bare. He watched the leaves release, one by one and then in clusters, spinning as they fell, catching the light, landing on the path and the roof and the surface of the pond, where they floated like small boats, going nowhere. Every year, a young student asked him the same question: "Does it make you sad to watch the leaves fall?" And every year, the monk gave a different answer. The first year he said, "No, the tree is not sad." The second year, he said, "The falling is part of the growing." The third year, he said, "Watch the leaf. It does not resist the wind. It does not hold on to the branch. It falls the way a dancer moves, because the music asks it to." The fourth year, he said nothing at all. He simply pointed at the tree. It was bare, and at its base, half buried in fallen leaves, the first green shoot of next year's growth was already pressing up through the soil. The student did not ask again after that. You are not the tree, and you are not the leaf. You are something more complicated than either. You are a being who remembers, who loves, who holds on, because holding on feels like honoring what was. But perhaps tonight, lying here in the dark, you can consider that honoring what was does not require carrying it. Perhaps you can honor the house with the blue door by being the person who lived in it. Perhaps you can honor the classroom by being the person who stood in it. Perhaps you can honor the past by being fully present to the life that is still happening. This breath, this night, this quiet hour that will also pass and become something you once had. Perhaps you notice in this moment a kind of loosening, not in the hands or the jaw, though those may have loosened too, but deeper, in the chest, in the place where the things we refuse to let go of are stored. Perhaps there is a sensation of something shifting, the way ice shifts when the first warm day arrives, not melting all at once, but cracking very quietly, along lines that were always there, waiting for permission to give way. You do not need to let go of anything tonight. You only need to notice that the holding is happening, and that the holding has a weight, and that the weight is something you have been carrying for a long time, and that your arms, your beautiful, tired arms, deserve to rest. Let us pause here. Take a breath, not a deep breath or a perfect breath, just a breath that is yours, that belongs to this moment and no other. Feel the surface beneath you. Feel the way it holds you without asking for anything in return. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is a quieter weight still, one that hides inside desire, inside the belief that happiness lives somewhere other than where you already are. It is the weight of always wanting more. There was a merchant who sold beautiful things. Her shop sat on a cobblestone street in a town that was old enough to have its own gravity. The kind of town where the buildings leaned slightly toward each other, like old friends sharing a secret, where the street lamps still used real flame in the evenings, where the cats knew the schedule of the fish market better than the fishmongers did. The shop was narrow and deep, like a hallway that had been given a purpose. Shelves lined both walls from floor to ceiling, and on those shelves sat the things she had gathered from years of traveling. Ceramic bowls, painted with birds she could name. Wooden boxes carved with patterns she could trace with her eyes closed. Silk scarves in colors that had no names in English, only in the languages of the places where the silk had been spun. There were candles that smelled of cedar and rain. There were journals bound in leather, the color of dark honey. There were small brass bells that rang with a sound so clear it seemed to hang in the air for a moment before dissolving, the way a drop of ink hangs in water before it disappears. She loved her shop. She loved the way the morning light came through the front window and touched the objects one by one, as though it were browsing. She loved the sound of the bell above the door when a customer entered. That small, bright announcement that someone had decided to step out of their day and into hers. She loved the conversations. She loved the way people held things, turning them over in their hands with a tenderness they did not show to their phones or their keys or the other objects that filled their lives by necessity rather than choice. But lately something had changed. The shop was full. Not just full in the way that a good shop is full, inviting, curated, each object given room to breathe. It was full in the way that a room is full when someone has been filling it for years without ever taking anything out. The shelves were crowded. The aisles were narrow. New shipments arrived every week, and she unpacked them and placed them wherever she could find space, which was increasingly nowhere. She had begun stacking boxes in the back room, then in the hallway, then on the stairs that led to her apartment above. She could no longer walk through her own home without turning sideways. She told herself she was building inventory. She told herself that variety was important, that customers wanted options, that a shop with fewer things would seem empty, and an empty shop would seem unsuccessful, and an unsuccessful shop would confirm the fear she carried in the back of her mind like a stone in her shoe. The fear that she was not doing enough, that she should be growing, expanding, adding, always adding, because the world rewards more and punishes less. And if she stopped adding, she would start falling behind. And if she fell behind, she would disappear. The more she added, the less she saw. The ceramic bowls she had once loved were buried behind boxes of things she could not remember ordering. The brass bells no longer rang because they were packed too tightly to move. The scarves had been folded and stacked and pressed into a corner where the light never reached, their colors fading in the dark, like songs no one sings anymore. A regular customer, An elderly man who came in every Thursday to buy a single candle and stay for conversation, looked around one afternoon and said something she did not expect. "I cannot find anything," he said. "It is all here," she replied, gesturing at the shelves. "More than ever." "That is the problem," he said gently. He set his candle down on the only clear surface he could find, the corner of a shelf that used to hold a single ceramic bowl, but now held 7. "When everything is here, nothing is. I used to come in, and each thing felt like it had been chosen. Like you had held it in your hands and decided, yes, this one belongs. Now it feels like a warehouse, like the things are not chosen, but accumulated. And an accumulated thing does not have the same warmth as a chosen thing. It does not hum the same way." She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him that every item had been selected, that she had traveled to markets and workshops across 3 countries, that she had held each piece and felt its weight and turned it in the light. "I chose all of these," she said. "I believe you did," he said. "But choosing 100 things is not the same as choosing one. When you choose one, it means something. When you choose 100, the choosing means less with each addition. It is like saying, 'I love you' to everyone you meet. The words become wallpaper." She looked around, really looked, for the first time in months, and saw what he saw: shelves so crowded that the objects pressed against each other like strangers on a packed train, each one losing its shape against the others. Easels so narrow that customers walked with their elbows tucked and their bags held high. Beauty buried under abundance, the way a single voice is buried in a crowd. And she realized that somewhere along the way, she had confused having more with being more. She had confused fullness with richness. She had filled the space so completely that there was no room left for the thing that had made the shop beautiful in the first place. The space itself, the breathing room, the quiet around each object that said, "Look at this. This one is worth your attention." That night after the old man left with his candle, she did something she had never done. She took 12 things off the shelves, just 12. She did not sell them or throw them away. She wrapped them in cloth and placed them in the back room. And the next morning, when the light came through the front window, it fell across the remaining objects with a clarity that made her catch her breath. Each bowl, each bell, each scarf was visible again. Each one had room to be seen. The shop looked emptier, but it felt fuller. And for the first time in months, a customer walked in and said, "Oh, this is lovely." The Buddha once made an observation so simple that it is easy to miss. He said that craving, tanha, the thirst for more, is not about the things we want. It is about the wanting itself. The wanting is the weight. A person who owns nothing and wants everything carries the same burden as a person who owns everything and wants more. The objects are irrelevant. What matters is the reaching, the endless, exhausting, reaching for the next thing, the better thing, the thing that will finally be enough to fill the space inside us that we have been trying to fill with things that do not fit there. You know this, reaching. You may be lying here tonight, still reaching, still making lists in your mind, still planning tomorrow's acquisitions, still scrolling through the catalogue of things you do not have. Not material things necessarily. Perhaps you are reaching for a better version of yourself, a more productive version, a thinner version, a version that meditates and exercises and reads the right books and says the right things at dinner parties. The reaching is the same, regardless of what is being reached for. And the exhaustion is the same. And the discovery, when it comes, is always the same. The thing you were reaching for does not fill the space. Nothing fills the space. Because the space is not a problem to be solved. It is a room to be lived in. There was a man who grew rice in a valley where the mountains came down on both sides, like the walls of a room, and the sky was a narrow blue strip overhead like a river made of air. He had been growing rice in this valley for his entire life, as his father had, and his grandfather, and his great-grandfather before that. The paddies were terraced up the mountainside in steps so precise and ancient that they looked, from a distance, like a staircase built for a giant who had walked there once and never returned. His life was small by most standards. He woke before dawn. He walked to the paddies in the dark, carrying a lantern that cast a circle of yellow light just wide enough to see the next step. He worked in the water, ankle deep, knee deep, sometimes waist deep, when the rains had been heavy, bending and planting, and weeding with hands so accustomed to the mud that they felt strange when they were clean. He ate simple meals, rice, vegetables from his garden, fish from the stream that ran through the bottom of the valley, tea that his wife brewed in a clay pot that had been in her family longer than anyone could remember. He did not want more. This is the part that confused the people who passed through the valley on their way to somewhere else. Travelers would stop and look at his small house, his simple clothes, his one pair of sandals drying on the porch, and they would feel a mixture of pity and admiration. Pity, because he had so little. Admiration, because he did not seem to mind. One traveler, a businessman from the city, well-dressed, carrying a leather bag full of documents that would make him richer than he already was, stopped to rest at the edge of the paddy and watched the farmer work. "Do you ever want more?" the businessman asked. The farmer straightened up. His back ached. It always ached by midday, but it was the kind of ache that comes from doing something real, and he did not mind it. He looked at the businessman's leather bag, his polished shoes already ruined by the mud, his face tight with the particular exhaustion of a person who has too many things to do and not enough time to do them in. More of what the farmer asked. It was not a challenge. It was a genuine question. His face held no judgment, only the open curiosity of someone for whom the question itself was interesting. More everything. A bigger house, better clothes. A car travel. Do you not look at the people passing through and want what they have? The farmer considered this. He wiped his hands on his trousers, which were already so muddy that the gesture was more habit than hygiene. The water in the paddy reflected the mountains and the narrow strip of sky, doubling the world so that it seemed, for a moment, as though there were two valleys stacked on top of each other. One real, one made of light. A dragonfly landed on a rice stalk and sat there, perfectly still, as though it had arrived at the only place it had ever wanted to be. The farmer watched it with the attentiveness of someone who has spent a lifetime noticing small things, and had come to understand that small things are not small. "I have rice," the farmer said slowly. "I have clean water from the stream. I have this valley, which my great-grandfather cleared with his hands, and which has fed my family for 4 generations. I have my wife's tea in the evening. She makes it with ginger when the weather turns cold, and the taste of it is the taste of home. I have the sound of the stream at night, which is the sound I have fallen asleep to for 53 years. I have the feeling of mud between my toes in the morning, which is the feeling of being alive and doing something that matters." He paused and looked at the businessman, not with pity, but with something closer to concern. "You have more than I do. That is clear, but tell me, when you eat, Do you taste the food? When you sleep, do you sleep? When you work, are you there? Or are you already somewhere else, planning the next thing? The businessman opened his mouth to answer and then closed it. Because the honest answer was no. He had a house he was rarely in. A beautiful house with rooms he had not entered in weeks. With a kitchen that was more showroom than kitchen. With a bed that was large and expensive and empty more nights than he cared to count. He had a car he drove too fast because driving fast felt like getting somewhere, though he was never sure where. He had a wife he loved but spoke to mostly by text. Their conversations reduced to logistics, pickup times and grocery lists, and the polite negotiations of two people sharing a life they were too busy to live. He had achievements and acquisitions and ambitions stacked so high that he could no longer see over them to the life they were supposed to be building. He had more, but he did not have this presence, this simplicity, this feeling of being exactly where you are and wanting nothing else. He had everything except the ability to enjoy any of it. The farmer bent back to his work. The water closed around his ankles. The mountains stood on either side like old witnesses who had seen this same scene 1,000 times. The traveler arriving with his heavy bags. The farmer standing in his empty field, richer in ways that no ledger could record. Shunryu Suzuki, the Zen teacher who brought practice to the West with such grace and humor, once said something that belongs here tonight. He said, "The most important point is to accept yourself and stand on your 2 feet, not on a mountain of possessions, not on a platform of achievements, not on the accumulated evidence of a life spent proving something to someone. Just on your 2 feet, just on this ground. Just here, just this." There is an ancient parable about a holy man who owned nothing but a begging bowl and a robe, so thin you could see the stars through it. A thief came to his hut in the night, a young thief, nervous, expecting to find something worth taking, the way thieves always expect, because the world has taught them that every hut hides something of value. He searched the hut. He searched it thoroughly, with the methodical desperation of someone who needs this to work. But the hut was empty. No furniture, no blankets, no food, no coins hidden beneath a loose board, nothing but the dirt floor and the moonlight coming through the window, and the faint smell of incense that had burned hours ago and left only its ghost. The thief left frustrated and embarrassed because he had come all this way for nothing, which is a kind of poverty he had not anticipated. The holy man who had been sitting outside, watching the sky, called after him, "Wait, I am sorry I had nothing for you to take. I wish you could have taken the moonlight. It was the most beautiful thing in my house tonight, and I would have given it to you freely. But moonlight is not the kind of thing that can be carried away in a sack. It can only be stood in." The thief turned back. The moonlight lay across the dirt floor of the empty hut, like a white cloth spread for a guest. The holy man stood in the doorway, smiling, owning nothing, missing nothing, full in the way that only emptiness can be full, the way a clear sky is full, the way silence is full, the way the space between 2 notes of music holds more than either note alone. Tonight, lying here in whatever room you are in, with whatever you own, stacked and stored and arranged around you, the things you bought and the things you inherited, and the things you cannot bring yourself to give away. Consider this. The moonlight is free. The breath is free. The quiet of this hour is free. The feeling of your body resting on this surface is free. The most valuable things you will experience tonight cannot be purchased, accumulated, or stored. they can only be noticed. And you are noticing them right now. Perhaps, in this moment, the desire for more has grown a little quieter. Not gone, it may never be gone entirely. And that is all right. The thirst does not need to disappear. It just needs to stop being the loudest voice in the room. And tonight, perhaps, it is not the loudest voice. Tonight, perhaps, the loudest voice is the one that says, "This is enough. This breath, this quiet, this rest. Enough, let us pause here gently. The night has grown late. The stories have carried us far, and there is a warmth in the traveling that does not come from arriving, but from being on the road together." Take a breath and feel the simplicity of this moment. Nothing to buy, nothing to earn, nothing to add, just this. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is one final weight I would like to name before we begin our journey home. It is the weight of needing to be in charge, the need to hold everything together, to control every outcome, to grip the wheel, even when the road is straight and the night is calm. Have you ever watched a river meet a stone? The water does not stop. It does not argue with the stone, or push against it, or form a committee to discuss whether the stone should be there. It does not waste a single moment wishing the stone were somewhere else. It simply moves around it. It finds the path of least resistance, not because it is weak, but because it understands something that most of us spend our entire lives failing to learn. The river understands that the stone is not the enemy. The stone is just the landscape. And the water's job is not to move the stone. The water's job is to keep flowing. Most of us are not rivers. Most of us are more like the person standing on the bank, shouting at the stone to get out of the way. There is a very old Zen story about a boat on a foggy river. A man is rowing upstream on a morning when the mist is so thick that he cannot see more than a few feet in front of him. The world has been reduced to white air, white water, white silence. His oars dip and pull, and the boat moves forward through the fog the way a thought moves through the mind, slowly, without certainty, guided more by feel than by sight. Suddenly, another boat appears out of the mist and crashes into his. The impact is jarring. Water splashes over the side. The man is furious. He shouts into the fog, his voice sharp and immediate, loaded with the righteous anger of someone who has been wronged. Who is steering that boat? What kind of careless, thoughtless person would ram into another boat on a morning like this? And then the fog shifts just enough, and he sees that the other boat is empty. There is no one in it. It has drifted loose from its mooring and floated downstream on its own, obeying nothing but the current. It is not careless. It is not thoughtless. It is not anything. It is just an empty boat, and the man's anger vanishes. Instantly, completely, not because the impact was any less real. His boat is still wet. His arm is still sore where it struck the gunwale. The morning is still disrupted. The oars are still knocked out of rhythm. The facts have not changed at all. But the story has changed. A moment ago, someone did this to him. Now something happened to him. And the difference between those two sentences, just the difference between someone and something, is the difference between anger and acceptance, between fighting and flowing, between the exhausting need to control and the quiet willingness to let life be what it is, even when what it is includes an empty boat crashing into your morning without warning or reason. Most of our suffering, if we are honest, comes from empty boats. The traffic jam is an empty boat. The cancelled flight is an empty boat. The rain on the day of the picnic is an empty boat. Even the people who hurt us are in a sense empty boats, driven by currents they cannot see, pushed by winds they did not choose, crashing into us not out of malice, but out of momentum. This does not excuse the damage, but it changes the question from who is responsible to can I let this pass through me without holding on? The Buddha understood this with great tenderness. He did not tell his students to stop caring about outcomes. He told them to stop clinging to outcomes, which is a very different thing. Caring is natural. Caring is human. Caring is what makes you show up at your child's school play and hold your partner's hand during difficult news and lie awake at night worrying about people you love. But clinging is the part that says, this must go the way I have planned. This person must behave the way I expect. This situation must resolve in my favor. And when it does not, when the empty boat crashes into your morning, clinging is the part that turns pain into suffering, disappointment into rage, surprise into a personal offense. There was a woman who planned everything. She was a project manager by profession, but the truth is she had been a project manager long before she had the title. She had been managing projects since she was 9 years old, when she organized her family's holiday dinners because her mother was too exhausted and her father was too distracted, and someone had to make sure the turkey came out on time. And the cousins did not fight, and the tablecloth matched the napkins even, though no one else cared whether the tablecloth matched the napkins. Not even a little, not even at all. She had a planner, not a planner in the casual sense, not a notebook where she jotted reminders and occasionally doodled in the margins. A system, a color-coded, cross-referenced, quarterly reviewed system housed in 3 separate applications that synced with each other, and with her phone and with the family calendar on the kitchen wall, which was itself color-coded: blue for the children, green for her husband, red for her mother, purple for the dog's vet appointments, and black for herself, though the black spaces were increasingly rare, squeezed between the colors of everyone else's needs, like narrow alleys between tall buildings where no sunlight ever reaches. She controlled the mornings, wake-up time staggered by 5 minutes, so the bathroom was never contested, breakfast rotations that ensured nutritional balance across the week, outfit selections laid out the night before on hangers labeled by day. She controlled the evenings, homework schedules, timed to end 15 minutes before dinner, screen time limits enforced by an app that sent her notifications when they were exceeded, bedtime routines so precise and so practiced that her children could have performed them in their sleep, which in a sense they did. She controlled the weekends, activities mapped by quadrant, errands batched for efficiency, social obligations sorted by priority, and fitted onto a timeline that allowed for exactly 45 minutes of what she called unstructured time, which she had scheduled, with no apparent sense of irony, between 3:15 and 4 o'clock on Saturday afternoons. She controlled the holidays, the vacations, the birthday parties, the teacher conferences, the oil changes, the flu shots, the grocery lists that were organized by aisle number, so she could move through the store without backtracking. She controlled the things that could be controlled and worried about the things that could not, and the worry was itself a form of control, a way of rehearsing disaster, so that if it arrived, she would be ready, the way a goalkeeper rehearses dives toward corners where the ball might never go. She was good at it. Everything ran smoothly. The turkey always came out on time. The tablecloth always matched the napkins. The children were fed and clothed and shuttled and scheduled. And beneath the smooth surface of her perfectly managed life, she was exhausted in a way that sleep could not touch, exhausted, not from doing, but from gripping, from holding the edges of every day so tightly that her hands ached, and her jaw ached, and her neck was a column of tension that no massage could undo, and her dreams, when she had them, were about lists she had not finished, and plans that had come undone, and clocks whose hands spun in directions that clocks should not spin, while she reached for them, and could not make them stop. Her husband said to her one evening, gently, in the kitchen, after the children were in bed, and the dog was asleep, and the house was as quiet as she ever allowed it to be. He said it, the way you say something you have been carrying in your chest for months, turning it over, waiting for the right moment, and finally realizing that there is no right moment, there is only now. What would happen if you let one thing go? She was loading the dishwasher. She had a system for the dishwasher too. Plates on the left, bowls in the center, cups on the top rack arranged by height. She did not look up. Which thing? Anything. Just one: the grocery list, the Saturday schedule, the birthday thank you cards. Just one. She straightened up. Her hands were wet. She held them in front of her, dripping onto the kitchen floor, and for a moment they looked like someone else's hands. The hands of a woman she did not recognize. A woman who was standing in a kitchen at 9:30 at night, with dishwater dripping from her fingers, and an expression on her face that was halfway between fear and the first tremor of something that might, if she let it, become relief. What would happen? She repeated. Yes, what would actually happen? She stared at him. The question landed in her chest like a stone dropping into still water, and the ripples moved outward in every direction, touching every wall of the carefully constructed container she had built around her life, and her family, and her days, and her minutes, and her breath. Everything would fall apart, she said, and she believed it. She believed it, the way a person standing on a bridge believes in the bridge, not because they have inspected the engineering, but because the alternative is unthinkable. Everything, he asked softly, or just the illusion that you are the only thing holding it together? She did not answer, but something in her knew he was right. Something in her had always known, the way you know when you are standing on a ladder that you cannot stay up there forever. Eventually, you have to come down. Eventually, your arms give out. Eventually, the thing you are reaching for on the top shelf turns out to be less important than the solid ground beneath your feet. Pema Chodron once wrote that the root of suffering is resisting the certainty that no matter what we do, things will not go as planned. She did not say this cruelly. She said it the way a doctor says. The bone is broken, not to cause despair, but to begin the healing. Because once you know the bone is broken, you can stop trying to walk on it. Once you know that control is an illusion, a beautiful, seductive, completely understandable illusion, you can stop exhausting yourself trying to maintain it. You can sit down. You can breathe. You can let the river carry the empty boat wherever it wants to go. There was a gardener, very old, nearly blind, who tended a garden that he could no longer see clearly. His eyes had begun to cloud in his 70s, and now, at 83, the world had taken on the quality of a watercolor painting left out in the rain. The colors were still there, but the edges had dissolved and everything blended into everything else in a way that was sometimes beautiful and sometimes disorienting and always humbling. The garden was behind his cottage, a rectangle of earth bordered by a low stone wall that his wife had built 40 years ago, before she died. Carrying the stones up from the stream one by one in her apron, he could still feel the wall When he walked the perimeter each morning, the rough surface warming in the sun, the moss growing in the gaps between the stones, the places where the mortar had crumbled, and he had pressed new mortar in with his thumb, keeping her wall standing the way she had kept everything standing, quietly without fanfare, one repair at a time. The edges of things had softened for him over the years. The roses were blurs of red against blurs of green. The path was a grey suggestion between green suggestions. The sky was a brightness that he could feel more than see. He worked by feel and by memory, and by a kind of trust that had taken him 80 years to develop. Trust that the seeds he planted would grow even if he could not watch them germinate. Trust that the rain would come even if he could not predict the afternoon it would arrive. Trust that the garden knew what it was doing, even when he, quite honestly, did not. His granddaughter visited on weekends. She was young and efficient, and could not understand why he did not label the rows, or test the soil, or follow a planting calendar, like the ones she had seen online. She loved him, but his method, if you could call it a method, made her anxious. "Grandpa, how do you know where to plant?" she asked one Saturday, watching him kneel in the dirt with a handful of seeds. "I do not know," he said cheerfully. "I put them where my hand goes. My hand has been doing this longer than my mind has. I trust it more. But what if they do not grow? Then they do not grow, and I plant again. But what if it rains too much, or too little? Then it rains too much or too little, and the garden adjusts. Gardens are very good at adjusting. Better than people." She knelt beside him. The dirt was cool and soft and smelled the way dirt smells after it has been cared for, rich and dark and alive, full of things that were happening below the surface where no one could see. "Are you not afraid?" she asked of not knowing. He smiled, his eyes clouded and pale, turned toward her face, not seeing her clearly, but knowing exactly where she was. The way he knew where everything was in this garden that he had tended for 50 years. "I was afraid for a very long time," he said. "I was afraid when I could see perfectly, maybe more afraid then than now. I was afraid of drought and frost and beetles and blight. I planned for every disaster. I tested the soil every spring. I kept charts. I controlled every variable I could control. The watering schedule, the spacing between rows, the exact depth of each seed. I read books about companion planting and moon phases and soil acidity. And the garden grew. It grew beautifully. But I did not enjoy it. I was too busy managing it to be in it. I was so focused on what might go wrong that I missed what was going right. I missed the tomatoes ripening. I missed the first crocus. I missed the smell of the earth after rain. I was standing in a garden, and I was not in the garden at all." He placed a seed in the soil and pressed the earth over it with his thumb. A gesture so gentle, it looked like a benediction, like a prayer made with the hands instead of the mouth. "Now I cannot see," he said. "I cannot plan. I cannot control. And the garden still grows. It grew before I was born. It will grow after I am gone. I was never the one making it happen. I was just the one who got to be here while it did. And being here, truly here, with dirt under my nails and the sun on my neck, and no idea whether the carrots will come up straight or crooked. Being here is the whole gift. The rest was just noise." The Buddha once said that peace comes not from controlling the world, but from releasing our grip on how we think it should be. This is not passivity. This is not giving up. It is the deepest kind of courage, the courage to stand in the uncertainty and trust that you will be held. Not by a plan, not by a system, not by your own white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel, but by life itself, which has been holding you since before you were born, and will continue holding you long after your plans have dissolved like fog in the morning sun. Tonight you are not in charge. You are not managing anything. The morning will come without your supervision. The earth will turn without your permission. Your heart will beat without your oversight. The breath you are breathing right now, that breath arrived without a plan. It was not on a calendar. It was not color-coded or cross-referenced. It simply came because that is what breath does, and it will continue to come all night while you rest. Perhaps you notice that the hands have softened, not because you told them to, but because hearing about letting go has given the body permission to demonstrate what letting go feels like. The fingers may have uncurled. The palms may have opened. The wrists may have gone slack against the sheets. This is not your doing. This is the body's own wisdom, older than any planner, deeper than any system, wiser than any mind that thinks it needs to hold everything together. You can let go tonight. Not of everything, not forever, just of the grip. Just of the tension that says, I must stay in control. You can let the empty boat drift. You can let the seeds grow where they land. You can let the night be what it is, unplanned, unmanaged, uncontrolled, and more beautiful for it than any schedule could have made it. Let us rest here now. We have traveled through 7 teachings tonight, 7 gentle explorations of the weights we carry. The journey is nearly complete, but there is one more place I would like to take you before we rest. A quiet place, an ending place, where the stories we have shared tonight come together in a single life, a single night, a single breath. When you are ready, we will continue together. We have come to the end of our journey tonight. It has been a long and gentle road. We have walked it together, through villages and workshops, through rice paddies and tea houses, through gardens and rivers, and quiet rooms where the only sound was the sound of someone finally telling the truth. We have met a young monk who could not put down a woman he carried across a river. We have sat with a baker whose anger kept him awake, and a rope maker whose hands could not stop moving, and a watchmaker whose mind outran his clocks. We have knelt beside a carpenter who measured himself against a ghost, and a woman who found herself in a crooked carrot pulled from the earth. We have watched a man fold a photograph into a drawer, and a teacher learn to say goodbye to the only room that ever felt like home. We have listened to a merchant learn that less can hold more than more, and a farmer explain that the taste of rice is enough, and a gardener plant seeds he would never see bloom. These are not lessons. They never were. They are simply stories about people who carried too much. The way you have carried too much, the way we all carry too much, and who found, each in their own way, in their own time, that putting something down does not mean it disappears. It means your arms are free, and free arms can hold new things, or they can simply rest at your sides, empty and light, feeling the air. Tonight, 2 threads from this journey keep returning. Let us sit with them one more time before we rest. The first is this: you are not broken for holding on. The younger monk was not broken. The baker was not broken. The rope maker, the watchmaker, the woman with the planner. None of them were broken. They were simply doing what human beings do, gripping what feels important, holding what feels like it might disappear if they let go, carrying what they believe is theirs to carry. The Buddha did not look at this tendency and call it a flaw. He called it upadana, clinging, and he spoke about it the way A kind doctor speaks about a common condition, not with alarm, not with judgment, with understanding, with the quiet recognition that this is what humans do. And it is also something humans can learn to do less of. Not by force, not by willpower, but by the slow, patient realization that the hands that are full cannot receive, that the arms that are carrying cannot embrace, that the mind that is gripping cannot rest, and that rest, true rest, the kind that reaches all the way down to the bones, requires nothing more than the willingness to open what has been closed. You open something tonight. Perhaps you do not know what. Perhaps it was small, a softening in the jaw, a loosening in the shoulders, a breath that went a little deeper than the ones before it. Perhaps it was large, a thought you have been carrying for years that, for just a moment, for the length of one exhale, you allowed to sit beside you instead of on top of you. Whatever it was enough. It was always going to be enough. The second thread is this: you do not need to be in charge of tonight. The empty boat drifts where the current takes it. The blind gardener plants where his hand goes. The river finds its way around the stone without a plan, without a meeting, without a color-coded calendar. And tonight, right now, your body is doing the same thing. It is breathing without your supervision. It is beating your heart without your permission. It is digesting and healing and repairing and doing 1,000 things you did not schedule, did not plan, could not control. Even if you tried, your body knows how to rest. It has always known. The mind is the one that forgot. And tonight, you are allowed to let the body lead. There is one more story I would like to tell you. It is the last story of the night, and it is not about a monk or a teacher or a farmer or a merchant. It is about a woman who could not sleep. She was ordinary in every way that the word ordinary can mean, which is to say she was extraordinary in ways that no one, including herself, had ever thought to notice. She worked at a desk in an office on the 4th floor of a building that looked like every other building on the block, glass and steel, and the kind of carpet that absorbs sound so thoroughly that the silence itself becomes a texture. She typed emails and attended meetings, and drank coffee from a mug that said, "World's Best Mum," which her son had given her 3 Christmases ago, back when he still thought she was the best at something. She drove a car that needed an oil change, and a windshield wiper that needed replacing, and a rear seat that still had cracker crumbs from a road trip she had taken with the children last summer. A trip she had planned for months, and that had been, by any measure, a good trip. A happy trip, a trip full of laughter and wrong turns and gas station snacks, eaten with sandy fingers. But she did not remember the laughter when she looked at the cracker crumbs. She remembered the moment at the rest stop, when she had snapped at her daughter for taking too long in the bathroom, and the look on her daughter's face, not angry, not hurt, just surprised, the way a child is, surprised when the person who is supposed to be safe suddenly is not. That look lived in her now. It had moved in and unpacked its bags and showed no signs of leaving. She had 2 children who were growing faster than she was ready for. Her son taller than her now, his voice deeper, his world expanding beyond the borders she had drawn around it, and her daughter quiet in a way that might be thoughtfulness, or might be the early architecture of a sadness she could not yet name. And she had a mother who was growing slower than she could bear to watch, a mother who had once been a force, a hurricane of competence and opinion and love, and was now a woman who forgot the word for spatula and called the dog by the name of a dog she had owned 20 years ago, and smiled at her daughter sometimes with a sweetness that was terrifying, because it was the sweetness of someone who is letting go of things they do not know they are letting go of. She carried all of it, the worry about her younger child, who was quiet in a way that might be thoughtfulness or might be sadness, and she could not tell which, and the not knowing sat in her stomach like a stone she had swallowed and could not dissolve. The guilt about her mother, whom she visited on Sundays, but not enough. Never enough, because no amount of Sundays could make up for the fact that her mother was disappearing, not dying, not yet just fading like a photograph left in the sun, the colors leaching out so slowly that you only noticed when you compared today's version to the one you remembered, and the distance between them took your breath away. She carried the argument she had had with her husband last Tuesday. She carried the email she should have sent on Friday. She carried the birthday party she had forgotten to RSVP to, and the dentist appointment she had cancelled twice, and the vague, persistent feeling that she was falling behind the other mothers, behind her own expectations, behind some invisible schedule that everyone else seemed to be following effortlessly, while she stumbled and apologized and promised herself that tomorrow would be better, that tomorrow she would wake up earlier and exercise and meditate and drink water and be present and be patient and be the person she kept meaning to become, but never quite arrived. As she lay in bed at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, the house was quiet, in the way that houses are quiet, when everyone has surrendered to the day, except the person who cannot. The children were asleep. She had checked, standing in their doorways, the way she did every night, watching the rise and fall of blankets, confirming the simple, devastating miracle that they were still here, still breathing, still hers, for a little while longer. Her husband was asleep, turned on his side, one arm thrown across the pillow where she usually lay. The dog was asleep at the foot of the bed, legs twitching in whatever dream dogs chase, rabbits, perhaps, or squirrels, or the golden open fields of dog heaven, where nothing needs to be fetched, and everything is already caught. And she was awake, wide awake, awake the way a light is awake, when someone has forgotten to switch it off, not by choice, but by accident, by the failure of some mechanism that was supposed to bring darkness, and did not. Her mind running its nightly marathon, reviewing, rehearsing, regretting, projecting, calculating, worrying, planning, replaying, revising, and above all holding everything, holding it so tightly that her shoulders were up around her ears and her jaw was clenched and her hands were curled into fists. She did not remember. She turned on her side. She turned on her back. She turned on her other side. She looked at the ceiling. She looked at the clock. She looked at the ceiling again. 11:14, 11:21. 11:36, and then, she did not know why, she could not have explained it. If you asked her, she could not have pointed to a reason, or a cause, or a moment of decision. She stopped. Not stopped as in gave up, not stopped as in decided to stop, more like the way a top stops spinning. Not because someone catches it, but because the spinning has run its course, and the energy that kept it going has quietly, without announcement, been spent. She stopped the way snow stops falling, the way a conversation stops when everything that needed to be said has been said, and what remains is not silence, but completion. She did not stop trying to sleep. She stopped trying to do anything. She stopped trying to solve the problem of her child's quietness, and her mother's fading, and her husband's feelings about the email, and the birthday, RSVP, and the dentist, and the clothes in the closet that fit a body she would never have again, and the person she was supposed to be becoming, the better person, the more patient person, the person who meditated and exercised and drank enough water. She stopped reaching for the next thought, the way she stopped reaching for her phone when there was nothing left to check. She simply stopped. And in the stopping, something happened that she had not expected. Something so small that in a louder life, in a busier mind, she would have missed it entirely. She noticed her breath, not in a dramatic way, not in a spiritual way, not in the way of someone who has read books about mindfulness and is doing it correctly. She simply noticed that she was breathing, that her chest was rising and falling, that the air was coming in cool through her nose and leaving warm through her slightly parted lips, that this had been happening all along, all evening, all day, all year, all her life, this quiet, faithful rhythm that asked nothing of her and gave her everything. She noticed the weight of the blanket on her body, the specific weight of it, not heavy, not light, but present, like a hand resting on her without pressing. She noticed the warmth of the dog against her feet. She noticed the sound of her husband breathing beside her, a sound she heard every night but never listened to, steady and slow, like waves on a shore she had been too busy to visit. She did not let go of anything. That is the part that surprised her. She had always thought that rest required letting go, a conscious, deliberate act of setting things down, one by one, the way you unpack a suitcase. But she did not unpack anything. She simply stopped lifting. She stopped picking things up. She stopped reaching for the next worry, the next plan, the next revision of herself. And without the lifting, without the reaching, the things she had been carrying did not disappear. They simply settled, the way snow settles, the way dust settles, the way everything settles when you stop stirring it. The guilt about her mother was still there, but it was lying beside her now, instead of sitting on her chest. The worry about her child was still there, but it was resting, curled like the dog, not pacing. The argument with her husband, the email, the RSVP, the closet full of clothes, all still there, all still real, but none of them demanding anything. They had been demanding because she had been responding, and when she stopped responding, not ignoring, just stopping, they stopped too. She lay in the dark and breathed. She did not meditate. She did not practice. She did not do anything she would have recognized as spiritual, or mindful, or intentional. She just lay there, a woman in a bed, breathing, feeling the weight of the blanket, hearing her husband's breath, existing in the most ordinary, unremarkable, beautiful way. The last thing she noticed before she fell asleep was her hands. They had uncurled. She did not remember uncurling them. They were lying open on the sheets, palms up, fingers relaxed, as though they had been waiting for this, waiting for permission to stop holding, to stop gripping, to stop carrying, and had finally, in the quiet of this ordinary Tuesday night, received it. She slept deeply, without dreams, without interruption, without the alarm she had set and would not need. She slept the way she had not slept in months, the way she had slept as a child, when sleep was not something you had to earn or achieve, but something that simply arrived, like darkness, like morning, like love. And when she woke, the things she had been carrying were still there. Her mother was still fading. Her child was still quiet. The email was still unsent. The closet was still full of clothes that did not fit. The world had not rearranged itself while she slept. Nothing had been solved. Nothing had been fixed. But she was lighter. Not because the things had changed, but because she had rested. And rest, it turns out, does not solve problems. It does not answer questions. It does not make the guilt go away, or the worry disappear, or the relationship heal. It simply gives you back your arms, and with your arms back, rested, unclenched open, you can carry what you need to carry. Not everything, just what you need. And the rest can wait. The rest has always been able to wait. It was only you who believed it could not. If this brought you some peace tonight, you are welcome to subscribe for more long-form audio like this, and share it with anyone who could use a slower night. Original commentary, stories and script, written and produced by Moonlit Dharma. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. And now, as the stories settle, and the night grows very still, perhaps you notice where your body meets the surface beneath you, the places where your weight is held, the back of the head, or the shoulders, or the small of the back, or the heels. These are the places where the earth is saying, I have you, you do not need to hold yourself up. That is my job tonight. Perhaps the shoulders have dropped, not because you told them to, but because they have been listening to these stories too, and they have heard, in their own way, that it is safe to rest. Perhaps the jaw has softened, perhaps the space between the eyebrows, that small furrow where the day's concentration lives, has smoothed itself out, like a sheet of paper that has been folded and is now, very slowly, being allowed to lie flat. The hands, wherever they are, may feel heavier than they did 3 hours ago. This is not tiredness. This is gravity. This is the earth gently reminding the body that it is welcome to come down, to stop floating in the mind, to return to the simple fact of weight and warmth and surface. The fingers may be uncurled, the palms may be open, the wrists may be soft. This is not something you are doing. This is something the body remembers how to do when the mind finally, gently steps aside. The breath has slowed. You may not have noticed, but it has been slowing all evening. Each inhale a little softer, each exhale a little longer, each pause between them a little wider. The body is preparing for sleep, the way a river prepares for the sea, not with effort, not with decision, but with the steady, unhurried movement toward the place it has always been going. Let the breath carry you. Let it be the last voice you hear tonight, not the voice of worry, not the voice of planning, not the voice that says you should be more, or do more, or try harder. Just the breath. Just this breath, and this one, and this one, and now the night is yours. The stories are resting. The teachings are resting. The monks, and the bakers, and the rope makers, and the gardeners, and the farmers, and the watchmakers, and the weavers, and the potters, and the merchants, they are all resting now. In the quiet country of the imagination, in the villages and valleys and riversides, where their stories will wait, patient and unchanged, until someone needs them again. They are not going anywhere. They will be here tomorrow night, and the night after that, and every night you need them. Stories do not expire. They do not run out. They simply wait, the way a candle waits to be lit, the way a path waits to be walked, the way the moonlight waits on the floor of an empty room for someone to notice it. And you are here, still here, in this bed, in this room, in this body that has carried you through another day, through the emails and the errands and the conversations and the small impossible acts of being human, and is now finally being allowed to set its burdens down. Not forever, just for tonight. Just for this slow, sweet, unremarkable, beautiful night that belongs to you and no one else. The moon is out somewhere. Even if you cannot see it from where you lie, it is doing what the moon has always done, shining without effort, illuminating without opinion, lighting the path for anyone who happens to look up. You do not need to look up tonight. You only need to close your eyes and trust that the light is there. The way the old gardener trusted that the seeds would grow. The way the river trusts that it will find the sea. The way the woman on the ordinary Tuesday trusted her breath to carry her into sleep without a plan. You have carried so much. You have carried it faithfully, bravely for longer than anyone should have to carry anything alone. And you have carried it well. And tonight, just tonight, the carrying is done. Rest now. Rest the way only you can rest, in your own body, in your own breath, in the one life that is yours to live and yours to set down at the end of each day. Like a book, you will pick up again in the morning. The story is not over. There are pages left, but the reading is done for tonight. You are held. You are safe. You are enough. You have always been enough. And the night which asks nothing of you, which has never asked anything of you, is very, very kind.